are very honored today to have two, not one, but two guests. So we have author illustrator Claudia McGehee, and we have author Jacqueline Briggs Martin with us, and they have collaborated on a fabulous book that we actually do carry at the library. And we have lots of their materials, so you're welcome to check those out too. But they're going to present this book that they have worked on together. That's what collaborating is, right? And it is called Creekfinding. So, could we give them a big Coralville welcome?
Thank you. Well, Claudia and I are so happy to be here today. We love what we do, writing stories and illustrating stories. And we also love talking about where we get the ideas for the words and for the pictures. Now, you might remember that our book is called Creekfinding. And do you hear in that word the word find? Which makes me think of losing, lost and found. Have any of you ever lost anything? I am constantly losing my keys and one shoe. Yes, what have you lost?
I've lost a lot of things.
Yeah.
I've lost a bow.
A bow. In the back row. A book.
A book.
A book. Did you have your hand up?
Everything.
Everything, like socks and books and, yes.
Mittens.
I couldn't hear you.
Mittens.
Mittens. Oh, yes. We could write a book about losing mittens, couldn't we? Yes.
About a watch?
A watch?
Yeah.
Forgot to turn my microphone on here. There. It's on? Okay. Did you find your watch?
Yeah.
Good. Well, can you imagine losing a creek? How would that happen? How would you lose a stream? Yeah.
It could evaporate.
It could evaporate on a really hot day, and sometimes they do. There are streams that are around in the spring during the rainy season or when snow melts, and then the sun shines, not enough rain, and they're gone. They evaporate. Yes?
They can also be gone if a dam has been built and if water can't go over it. That's how the other side gets dried up.
That's how the other side gets dried up. So it could evaporate. It could be dammed up so there's no water left to be in that stream. Anybody else want to make a comment on stream losing? Yes?
The grass could grow and then it could hog up all this thing.
Grass could grow in the stream and the grass would use some of the water. Yeah. Yes?
We could, there would be grass and the mud would soak into the water. The water would soak into the mud.
And there would be no stream because it just kind of, maybe somebody would scrape away the bank and the water would just kind of riffle out onto the field and become muddy. Yeah, yes.
It could hide in the grass.
Yeah, could just go, yeah.
It could just flow somewhere else.
Mm-hmm. Well, up in northeast Iowa, this is how a stream got lost. It was a stream that came up out of a spring and trickled across a field. And a farmer had that field, and he had the stream going through it, and he thought, if I didn't have this creek, I could plant corn in that space. And that's what he wanted to do, because he wanted to grow more corn. So he made, you guys will understand this because you understand so much about streams. There's the spring right here, and he made a ditch for the water to go down, and he filled in that old stream path with dirt so that it wasn't a stream anymore. It was just a big cornfield. And that ditch on the side was just a ditch. It wasn't a clear stream. It didn't have any rocks, didn't have any fish. It was just ditch water. And actually up there, People used to put their junk cars in that ditch, so it was a mess. Well, a man named Mike bought that farm in about 2000, about the year 2000. And he wanted to make the cornfield be prairie, with prairie plants in it and prairie flowers. So he was out there working one day, and a man stopped by, a neighbor, and he said, "I caught a brook trout in this field when I was a boy." And Mike thought, how could you catch a brook trout in a cornfield? And he decided there must have been a stream going through that cornfield. So he looked around, and he found that spring that used to be the beginning of the stream. And then he thought, I'm going to see if I can find that creek. So he hadn't planted any corn in that field because he wanted to make it into prairie. And he noticed when it rained, the rain kind of made a path through the field. And he thought maybe that's where the lost creek was. But he also found a photograph taken from the sky of when the creek was there, so he could see the path of the real creek. And he marked it out with flags, and it was exactly where the water drained. So he knew he had the path of the stream. And he got some excavators and some bulldozers to dig out that path, and the water just swooshed into that path. And he said it was as if the water remembered where it wanted to go. Isn't that interesting? So he put rocks in the bottom, and he planted plants along the sides, and he waited a few years, and pretty soon he saw these small fish. Claudia, where's your sculpin? Is this your sculpin? These little funny-looking fish with big jaws called sculpin. Well, the nice thing about sculpin is they tell you that the water is clean. They can only live in really clean water. And that made Mike happy because what he wanted to do is put trout in that stream. He's a trout fisherman, and he loves catching trout. And then he throws them back in. He just does catch and release. So he waited another year, and he got some tiny little trouts from a place called Pine Creek. And he put them in, and they grew all summer. I believe they do not lay eggs until the next year. Do you remember, Claudia? I think so. They grew, and they survived the winter. They laid their eggs, and then they had to wait another winter to see if the babies would survive. And they did. And when the babies survived, Mike was pretty excited. He was so excited that he told a reporter for the Cedar Rapids Gazette. And I live in Mount Vernon, and I subscribe to the Cedar Rapids Gazette. So one morning, I opened up my newspaper, and I read this article about Mike's Creek and what he had done, and that the trout had come back. But the best part of it was, not only did the trout come back, but all the birds came back to the creek, and all the frogs came back to the creek, and all the bugs came back. And Mike didn't put those in the creek. They just found it all by themselves. And I thought, how did they know? How did those frogs know? The article said all the kinds of frogs in Iowa are along that creek. How did those frogs know there was a creek there? I had to do research. I had to figure out how those frogs and bugs and birds knew that there was a creek there. And I knew I wanted to write a story about it. And I also knew I do not draw pictures. If you could see me draw, you would know I do not draw pictures. But I have a friend who draws great fish and great foxes. And I bet you know who that is. Yes. So I called her up and I said, Claudia, I've read this great story about a creek. If I write it, would you draw the pictures for it? And she did not say no. So I started writing. I started researching, and I started writing. And when I had the words, and it took me a long time to get the words. It took me about 2 years to get the words right. I started out with probably 1,400, 1,500 words, and I ended up with 400 words. So it was kind of like sculpting away all the extra words. And when I had the words right, then I took the words down to Claudia, who lives in Iowa City, and she started doing the pictures. And Claudia's going to tell you about the pictures, and then we will read the book, and then we have some things on the tables in back that we're going to do.
Thanks, Jackie. When Jackie says the word finding, I always think of finding friends, and I'm really glad that I found Jackie when I moved here to Iowa about 20 years ago. So we've been friends a long, long time. And speaking more about finding things, so we know that Mike found the stream, and we know that Jackie found the story about the stream, the creek, and she found words that goes with the story. And it was my turn to find pictures for the story. So how an illustrator starts, I have to do research too. I knew that this book would be a lot of fish. I would be drawing fish. How many of here have ever fished before? Anybody? It's quite a few. Well, I've only done it maybe once or twice, so I didn't even know how many fins were on a fish. So I had to look them up online and in books and make sure that I could draw each fish with as many fins as they have. And then I go and I draw tiny little scenes called thumbnails. You know why they're called thumbnails? Because they're as big as a thumbnail. So I draw them very tiny so I can see how all the pictures will look in a book along with Jackie's words. So I have to do a lot of planning. And then I get to start drawing. So first I draw in pencil, because I can erase pencil. And I draw on a very thin piece of paper that I can then transfer onto the top of this art medium that I use. An art medium is something you make with art. Have you ever drawn with color crayons before? Have you used color crayons? Watercolor? Well, that's an art medium. And my art medium is called scratchboard. So it's a black board that's pretty thin, this thin. It's covered with black, and I take a tiny little knife and I scratch out what I want white or what I'm going to color, and I leave what I want black. And then the result is this kind of scratchy drawing that looks almost alive in a way. And I thought it was perfect for creek finding. So this is what it looks like at the very end once I get the color in. And you'll see this in the picture book in a minute when we read it to you. Here's another illustration that I did from the book. So then you can really see, but see how tiny wee some of those illustrations are? There's a tiny little fox somewhere in here. Can you see him? There he is. There.
Oh my gosh.
Very tiny. Should I pass it around? You guys like that? Why don't you take a look and check it out and feel scratchboard too? Should I say a few words about the art activities, or should I do that?
Yeah.
All right. So today we have a couple things for you to do after we read the book. One, we're going to color fish. We have fish that you can color and make into mobiles and hang. We have fish and frogs and toads. And then the other is, it's a really cool thing called geotaku. Can you say that? Geotaku. It's a Japanese word for fish printing. And a long, long time ago, in the olden days, when the Japanese used to go out and fish, they wanted to be able to record what kind of fish they caught. So when they got back to the dock, they would take the fish and ink it up, just one fish, and put rice paper over the top, just white paper, and then make a print out of it. Kind of press it down a little and then lift up the paper, and then they would know that they caught this kind of fish when they were fishing. Geotaku. There it is. So, well, so today you can do it. If you do real geotaku, you use real fish. But we can also use, it's a less smelly way of a copy of a fish. And we have 2 trout in the back. So we'll all get a chance if we'd like to make geotakus if we like. But we thought now we would like to read the book. What do you think?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. I have one more story to tell you before I read. Do you see this dog on the cover of the book? This dog's name is Max, and this is Mike. Max was Mike's dog, and Max loved this creek, and he loved going to this farm with Mike. Every time Mike went to the farm, Max went, and Max got so excited when he saw Mike headed toward his pickup truck to go to the farm. He loved Prairie Song Farm, where the creek is. Well, Claudia was working on the pictures for this book, and we got a call from Mike. And he said, "Can you put a picture of Max in the book?" Max got very sick, and he died. And Mike missed him so much that he wanted his picture in the book about the creek. So Claudia actually had started this picture, hadn't you, Claudia? Mm-hmm. But she made a place for Max. So when you look at this book, you will know that Mike is real and Max is real, and they both loved the creek. Creekfinding, a true story. The creekfinding machine. An excavator is a machine that chomps dirt. Excavators dig holes for basements, trenches for water pipes, paths for roads. Sometimes excavators find lost creeks. How do they do that? How does a creek get lost? Especially a creek that started long ago with a spring that burbled out of the ground and tumbled itself across a prairie valley. The creek wasn't just water. Insects whirred in and around the creek. Brook trout grew fat in the creek, lunching on insects. Frogs chirped by the creek, ready for their buggy share. Birds watched at the streamside, hungry for bugs, fish, or frogs. Well, the creek did not lose itself. A farmer used a bulldozer to stuff the creek with dirt so he would have more space to grow corn. No water, no water bugs, no frogs, no birds, and no brook trout. The lost creek was quiet under the sun. Trout in a cornfield. Years later, a man named Mike bought that field and the hillside. Mike wanted to grow a prairie in the old cornfield, to partner with the sun and soil, grow tall grasses and flowers. One day, as Mike was out working, a neighbor came by and said that long ago he had caught a brook trout in that very spot. A brook trout in a cornfield? No way. Partnering with the creek. Mike knew there must have been a creek on that prairie. He wanted to find the creek, make a place for brook trout, birds, bugs, and frogs. He said he would call it Brook Creek. Others laughed, said Mike's plan was foolishness. Lost is lost. But someone gave him an old photograph, and he marked the creek's path. Then he called his friends who owned the big machines. And this photograph on this page is the actual photograph that someone gave to Mike. It's very small, so it would fit on the page, but it's a real aerial photograph.
The actual size?
No, the actual photograph was probably bigger, but we had to make it small enough to fit on the page. So it's like, oh, I don't know, if you have a picture of something and you shrink it and shrink it and shrink it, that's what we did.
So is it like the actual size compared to people? Like the people, if the people were that size, would that picture the photograph?
I think, yeah, I think it's proportional. And it is big enough that you can see some of the markings on the photograph. Scraping and digging. For 5 days, a bulldozer scraped, an excavator bit into the ground, carved holes, dug curves and runs, tamped rocks for the creek bottom. The excavator had found the old stream. Would water fill the path? Mike said the water remembered. It seeped in from the sides, raced down the riffles and runs, burbled into holes, and filled the creek. But a creek isn't just water. It's plants, rocks, bugs, fish, and birds. Mike and his friends tucked cordgrass and other green shoots into the creek banks. 3 summers grasses grew. When the creek bed needed more rocks, Mike had a problem. Heavy trucks crossing to the creek would press deep ruts into the ground, kill Mike's new prairie plants. How could he get more rocks into the creek? Mike waited until winter. When the ground was frozen hard, cement trucks lumbered across the prairie, emptied their rocks into the creek, and left no ruts. And the reason that he used cement trucks is he didn't want to just have a dump truck dump a pile of rocks in the creek. He wanted to put them where he wanted them, a few here, a few over here. And you know how cement trucks have those chutes where the cement comes out? Well, he could move the rocks where he wanted them with cement trucks. So that's why he filled the cement trucks with rocks. He wasn't putting cement in the creek. He was putting rocks in. Rocks settled in, plants grew, insects flew in, whirred and buzzed and laid eggs in the water and on the grasses. After 2 more years, small fish called sculpin swam into the creek, and that was good news. Sculpin survive only in clean, clear water, the same kind of water that brook trout need. Time for trout. A pickup carried the tub that held the trout. Mike and his friends laughed in the morning air, lugged and dumped buckets of finger-sized fish. Perhaps Brook Creek laughed too, tickled by trout. Water was right, food was right. Trout snapped up bugs and grew for 2 summers. In the second fall, the rocks proved perfect places for fish to lay eggs. And this is how it happens. The female trout uses her tail and she scoops out a little shallow space in the rocks. And then she lays the eggs. And then the male trout swims by and fertilizes the eggs. And then the female comes back and covers them up. And the trout, see that color? They actually turn this beautiful red. They're usually not red, but during egg laying season, they turn red. Winter came. Would the eggs survive? Snowstorm, ice storm, cold wind. Fish squiggles. Then one late winter morning, fish squiggles no longer than a thumbnail. Squiggles grew into fat trout who laid eggs in turn to hatch more generations of trout at home in Brook Creek. Maybe a chuckle, maybe a thanks. If you went to the creek with Mike, you'd see the water. But a creek isn't just water. You'd see brook trout and sculpin. You'd hear the outdoor orchestra, herons, snipe, bluebirds, yellowthroat warblers, frogs returned home, and insects, thousands and thousands and thousands of insects. You'd hear the water ripple and burble, maybe a chuckle, maybe a thanks to Mike and the big machines that found Brook Creek. The end. Thank you. What a treat to share this story with you. It's an Iowa story. This all happened up in northeast Iowa in a little town called Dorchester. I live in Iowa. Claudia lives in Iowa. It's a total Iowa story.
Thank you very much. Bye.